When my father shouted at my mother in court, it wasn't his voice that broke me. It was how calm everyone else stayed. The judge didn't flinch. The lawyers kept flipping pages. And my mother, she just sat there small and silent like she'd learned long ago that speaking only made things worse. I stood up before I even knew I would. His words still hung in the air. "You'll walk out with nothing." That was the moment something in me snapped. The daughter who used to believe her father's numbers never lied finally realized he'd been rewriting the math of our lives for years. My name is Alice Monroe, and 2 months before that day, I discovered what it really costs to be quiet in a family that worships power. The courtroom was too bright, too clean, too still. I could hear the scratch of a pen somewhere behind me, steady as a pulse. The polished wood smelled of lemon oil and old paper just as it seemed needed maintenance to keep working. Across the aisle stood my father, Arthur Monroe, spine straight, gold tie shining under the fluorescent lights. He looked like a man cut from a magazine ad, the kind that sells success, as if it's something you can wear. But when he spoke, that image cracked. His voice shot through the room, sharp and final. My mother flinched. Her hand tightened around the pen until I saw a smear of red at her fingertips. Behind him, Sylvia smiled, thin, glassy, the kind of smile that draws blood if you touch it wrong. I rose to my feet before I could think. The air shifted. Judge Eleanor Vance, silver hair, framing an unshakable face, lifted her gaze toward me and nodded once. I crossed the floor, heels echoing, and set a white envelope on the table. The soft click of it hitting wood sounded like thunder in my head. The judge broke the seal and began to read. No one breathed. My mother stared at the floor. My father leaned back, sure of his victory. Then the smallest curve appeared at the judge's lips. A quiet laugh escaped her, light, but certain, rippling through the silence like a crack in glass. "This," she said, "is good. Very good." My father froze. Sylvia's smirk died. My hand trembled, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. 2 months of sleepless nights of numbers and names and paper cuts, all of it rested inside that envelope. And it had all begun with one wrong number. 2 months before the trial, I went back to Denver. I'd taken a short leave after a long federal case, the kind that drains you until even silence feels loud. When Mom called, her voice trembled through the line. She only needed a little help sorting out some bank things. Her house felt smaller than I remembered, as if it was holding its breath. The walls were bare, except for one old wedding photo. My father in a tux, my mother smiling wide. The glass was cracked clean through the middle like a silent argument frozen in time. She told me he'd moved out, said he needed space for a new project with Sylvia. The name hung in the air like smoke. I opened her laptop to check the joint savings account. Everything looked normal until it didn't. A withdrawal of $20,000 processed the same Friday she was hospitalized for low blood pressure. My stomach tightened. I asked if she'd signed anything that week. She avoided my eyes, murmured that he said it was a tax adjustment. That was the moment my instincts flared. I asked for her property records, pretending it was just for organization. Inside, I found a deed transfer for the Aspen house, notarized complete with my mother's signature. Her real signature looped softly, but this one sliced straight hard, controlled unmistakably my father's. I placed the papers on the table. Mom stared at them, quiet. Her silence was heavier than any confession. I made copies, filed them under a new folder marked personal. I didn't say anything else. What I held wasn't just a document. It was the first fracture in a lie. My father had spent years building one number at a time. 2 days later, I drove to Monroe Construction, the office where I'd once interned in college. It looked the same, bright, neat. Filled with awards, but the air felt hollow, like the pride had been scrubbed out. 2 coffee cups sat on the desk, one black, one latte. Sylvia's perfume, thick vanilla, still lingered in the air. I'd remember that scent later attached to every stolen dollar on his statements. I said I was there to pick up old files. When the receptionist left, I checked the recycling bin beside the printer. Torn pages, shredded lines of text, half a header. I pieced them together on the desk until they made sense. A bank transfer record. Destination Artis Holdings. Amount $50,000. Date 3 weeks ago. Signed, Arthur Monroe. My pulse slammed in my ears. Artis. Arthur and Sylvia. I knew that name. Last year, I'd seen it on a list of offshore entities flagged for money laundering in the Cayman Islands. I looked it up again on my phone. Same company, same address, same shell. If my father was routing money through it, he wasn't just cheating my mother. He was committing federal fraud. I took photos, uploaded them to a secure drive, then texted an old colleague, Simon Grant. Need your eyes on something? Quietly. His reply came fast. You sure you want to open that door? It's already open, I typed back. I sat in his office chair, heart pounding. Every line of data I'd ever analyzed, every chart and column suddenly pointed home. If I filed this through official channels, I could lose my job. If I stayed silent, my mother would lose everything. So, I decided on something worse than both. I'd investigate it myself. From that moment on, I stopped being a daughter. I became evidence. Giovanni's sat in the heart of Denver, one of those restaurants where people went, not because they were hungry, but because they needed to prove they still mattered. I hadn't wanted to go, but Mom begged. He said it's just dinner, she whispered. Maybe he wants to make peace. Peace. My father never understood the word. When we walked in, Sylvia was already there, draped in white, her diamond necklace flashing under the chandelier. My father stood to greet us as if he were hosting a press conference. His voice carried that performative warmth he used when there was an audience. I forced a polite smile, but my eyes drifted to the beige folder resting by his elbow. Through dinner, he talked about fairness, restructuring, balance, words that sounded noble until you realized he used them to justify control. Mom barely spoke, just nodded like someone signing a confession she didn't write. When the main course arrived, he slid the folder toward her. Just a standard property agreement, he said smoothly. You'll keep the house. I'll handle the mortgage. Everyone wins. I flipped through the pages. The title at the top read, Transfer of Ownership, Artis Holdings. My stomach dropped, Artis, the same name I'd pieced together from the trash. I looked at him and asked quietly when Mom had agreed to move assets through his new company. He answered without hesitation that she'd signed last week. She was in the hospital last week, I said slowly. The table froze. Sylvia's wine spilled across the linen crimson, bleeding into white. My father's face tightened. Mom's eyes darted between us, trembling. Arthur, is that true? He gave a soft, practiced laugh, the kind that comes from years of rehearsing lies. Clerical mistake. Happens all the time. But I knew better. In admitting it existed, he'd already confirmed its truth. I picked up a napkin, wiped the spill, mostly to hide the shake in my hands. Mistakes can be fixed, I said evenly. Some just take a courtroom, he said. Nothing. The waiter hovered unsure. Sylvia stared at her glass, pretending not to exist. Mom cried the whole ride home. I didn't. I was too cold to cry. That night, I realized my father wasn't negotiating a divorce. He was staging a legal heist. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and typed a single message to Simon. I'm in. I'll need every public record you can legally verify. I didn't yet know that opening that door meant my father would soon come after me. 3 days later, Simon called. His tone was clipped, cautious. You were right, he said. Artis Holdings is a shell. There are 3 more Front Range, really Primestone and Arc Vista. All moving money offshore after the divorce court's freeze order. I sat at Mom's kitchen table surrounded by receipts, feeling my pulse thud in my ears. That meant Dad had broken a federal order. This wasn't marital deceit anymore. It was financial crime. If we go public, I said, he'll go to prison. If you file it wrong, Simon replied, so will you. He was right. I'd used archived data from my old federal cases. In the wrong hands, it looked like I'd abused government access. If my father fell, I might fall with him. So, what do I do? I asked. Start over, he said. Forget the system. Build your case as a civilian. Then it's yours, not theirs. After the call, I watched Mom folding laundry in the next room, unaware her husband was turning her life into a spreadsheet of stolen assets. The man who once lectured me on integrity and bookkeeping was now the cautionary tale in his own lesson. I opened my notebook and began mapping the Flow Artis holdings. Cayman Sylvia Front Range Really maintenance fees, hidden sub-accounts, Arc Vista consulting payments to unknown, every path circled back to one name, Arthur Monroe. You taught me to find patterns, Dad, I whispered. You just never thought you'd become one. I emailed Simon again, rebuilding from scratch. Keep quiet, his reply came minutes later. Be careful. You're being watched. Twist tightened into twist. He discovered my name on an internal DOJ monitoring list. My father had used his connections to flag me as a potential leak. I leaned back, the weight of it sinking in. I'd crossed the line between daughter and whistleblower, and there was no way back. That night, under the dim kitchen light, I sealed my first file in a cardboard folder and wrote across it by hand. Exhibit A for Mother. The bitter smell of coffee filled the room as I pressed the tape shut. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. Only ready. That was the night I declared war. Mom was fading fast. She said she just wanted it all over with that signing. The papers would finally bring her peace. Her hand trembled as the pen touched the line, the ink bleeding into the corner of the page. Mom, don't. He just wants closure. Alice, he said, I can keep the house. He already transferred it to his company. I said quietly. I saw the deed. She froze, then whispered as if confessing something shameful. He promised me peace. That word coming from her felt like a sedative. I turned away so she wouldn't see the tears threatening to rise. Peace had become her permission to surrender. I spent the next hour digging through the filing cabinet papers, spilling like years of forgotten truth. In the bottom drawer, buried under faded folders, I found a small brown notebook, the one she used to track every household expense since the 90s. The pages were meticulous travel dates, grocery bills, cash withdrawals, every detail written in looping blue ink. I turned to April 12th, the day of the forged Aspen deed. Next to it, a note read, Hose, no visitors today. Arthur said he's on site. I stopped breathing. The same day he claimed she'd signed the property transfer, she was lying in a hospital bed. The notebook was a perfect timeline, an unintentional forensic record. It was the kind of proof a courtroom couldn't argue with. I scanned every page, stamped it, sealed it. 3 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. You are placed under administrative leave pending investigation for data misuse. I stared at the sender line. The signature at the bottom read at Monroe. My father. He wasn't satisfied stealing from my mother. He wanted to erase me too. When I told Mom, she cried, not for the money but for what it meant. He used to call you his mirror, she said through tears. He still does. I answered. He just forgot mirrors reflect the truth. I picked up the notebook and slid it into my briefcase. This is our weapon now. I turned in my badge and ID the next morning. No title, no protection, just me and a box of evidence too heavy for one person to carry. By Thursday night, Denver rain hammered the roof like a countdown. Sylvia showed up at my door in a white raincoat, umbrella dripping. Her voice was sugar-coated dangerous. Your father's scared, she said. Then he shouldn't have broken the law. He built everything for you. No, he built it for control. I'm just breaking ground for truth. She slid a thin envelope across my kitchen table. 50,000, walk away. I pushed it back toward her. Keep it. You'll need it for bail. She froze, eyes wide, then stormed out into the rain. What she didn't know was that my doorbell camera had recorded every word. The footage now joined the rest of my files. Proof of witness tampering. I gathered everything into a clean white envelope and wrote on the front for the court, verified by S. Grant. Simon arrived that night, soaked from the rain. He read the label, nodded, then signed as witness. Alice, he said quietly. You're on the DOJ's watch list. He used his contacts to flag you as a risk, so they're watching me at every move. Good, I said, exhaling. Then they'll see how justice is built. I placed the envelope into my safe and locked it. My hands trembled, but my heartbeat was steady. You taught me precision, Dad. Now you'll see what it looks like when precision grows a conscience. 2 weeks later, that envelope would make a judge laugh, and my family's history would never sound the same again. The morning of the hearing was cold and bright. Jefferson County Courthouse, 2nd floor, room 4. I carried the sealed white envelope, the envelope of truth, with Simon Grant's signature across the seal. Mom walked beside me, small, fragile, trying to stand, but not to fight. Across the aisle, my father stood between his lawyer and Sylvia. His gray suit was sharp. His grin confident, the look of a man who still believed he owned the room. He shook hands, whispered something to Sylvia that made her laugh, brittle and forced. Case number 34107, Monroe vs. Monroe. Judge Eleanor Vance entered, her voice steady as a gavel strike. We'll proceed with final testimonies. His lawyer spoke first, smooth as silk, painting him as a devoted husband who had managed the family finances efficiently. I almost laughed. Efficient was one word for draining every account clean. Then came their exhibit, a blurry photocopy of my mother's signature. Forged shaky fake. Your Honor. May I submit an independent exhibit? I asked. Proceed, Miss Monroe. The room went silent as I set the envelope on the table. The soft click of paper meeting wood felt like thunder. Judge Vance broke the seal and read the forged deed. Mom's notebook matching bank transfers, Simon's audit. Sylvia's bribe recording. 2 minutes of silence. Then she smiled. Mr. Monroe. In 30 years on this bench, I've rarely seen evidence so clean and lies so poorly built. Dad jumped up, shouting, sit down, the judge ordered, edge sharp as a command. You didn't just cheat a wife. You committed fraud. Then she turned to me gentler. M. Monroe, your documentation is impeccable. Thank you for restoring honesty to this court. And then she laughed, not mockingly, but like justice itself exhaled. Mom was crying, but her chin was lifted. The gavel fell. Ownership to Mrs. Monroe. Federal inquiry to follow. My father's knees wavered. I drew a slow breath. For the first time in my life, justice didn't just win. It smiled. A week after the hearing, I sat in a cafe downtown, watching the drizzle streak down the glass. The city moved slow under the rain like even Denver was exhaling. Sylvia walked in unpainted and pale, stripped of the armor she once wore so proudly. She sat across from me, voice trembling. He's being investigated. They froze everything. Then I guess justice doesn't need my help anymore, I said. She slid a small envelope across the table. I didn't know about the forgeries, she whispered. You signed the checks, Sylvia. He told me it was legal. That's what every accomplice says before indictment. Her eyes filled the tears, cutting lines through her foundationless face. What will happen to him? Whatever the law decides. And I'll sleep. The next morning, Simon called. FBI filed charges. Financial fraud 18 U.S.C. 0344. He's done. I paused, waiting for triumph to come, but it didn't. Only quiet. When I returned to the office, my supervisor handed me a sealed folder stamped in red "Combination for Ethical Conduct in Civilian Justice Support." "You broke protocol, Alice," he said. "I know, but you fixed the system. Don't ever stop." That evening, I found Mom in the garden trimming roses, her hands steady again. "So, it's over?" she asked. "It's starting," I said. "What now?" "We rebuild." She smiled, soft but sure. "Your father's daughter," she murmured, then looked up at me. "But the better version." A month later, Mom and I opened a small cafe in Boulder, the Anchor Cafe. The name was her idea. I teased that it sounded more like an accounting office than a coffee shop. "That's the point," she said with a smile. "Every cup will balance something." On our first morning, sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows, painting gold across the counter. The smell of fresh roast and cinnamon filled the room, soft and alive. I taped a small sign to the wall, the words printed in plain black letters. "Truth Brewed Daily, Our First Customer." Mr. Harris, the 70-year-old veteran who lived next door, stepped in, tipping his cap. "After all that, don't you hate him?" he asked. I smiled. "No, I'm just done financing his lies." Mom chuckled quietly, dusting cocoa over a cappuccino. "You think the judge remembers you?" "I hope she doesn't have to," I said. When the morning rush slowed, I turned on my old voice recorder, the one I'd used through every sleepless night of the case. My voice filled the quiet air, calm and steady. "Justice isn't revenge. It's the quiet math of what's fair. And sometimes laughter in a courtroom is just truth exhaling." I switched it off and watched through the window as the sunlight rose over the Rockies. The snow was melting, turning the streets into mirrors of light. Mom stood by the counter, humming, "You'll Never Walk Alone," her hands no longer shaking. I breathed in the scent of espresso and peace. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. Justice, I thought, isn't always a hammer or a headline. Sometimes it's the soft sound of two women sharing silence, their scars cooling, their hearts steady again. Outside, the sign swayed gently in the breeze, the Anchor Cafe. It didn't matter if the world remembered the trial or the laughter or the man who once tried to rewrite our lives. What mattered was this: we had found balance again. And as the day began, I poured 2 cups of coffee, set one across from Mom, and whispered to myself, "Some debts are better settled in peace."